And then one time, I don't know why I favorites to that dollar store. Like, it's realized that there's this restaurant that Niles and Chris had to go to. And they just not dollars, but Niles would call it dollars. It's like a Chinese restaurant. That's not scary, and it's $1 per scoop. And I don't, me and Zori went with the code, and I don't know why I ate that. It wasn't terrible, but I didn't swear. But it was $1 a scoop, so not the most fun. Oh, because we haven't. They sponsored one of our lunch times a couple years ago, and that's the best thing. Because anytime I'm somewhere,
yeah, in a normal year, usually we have one to learn.
Hey, Carolyn, you're on mute.
Hey, Gary.
How are you?
I'm good.
You've been busy this morning.
I have been busy. Yes. Trying to make sure that they're proceeding on their stories. I thought, let's get a check-in with them this morning, and they'll make sure that we actually have stories in the morning. And I think that was a good move, because Joe didn't have a story. And now I directed him to an easy, slim pickings type story, because of the debate in the Senate this morning on an interesting bill. So,
were you watching that, or did you read about it somewhere?
I was watching it.
Okay.
You know, hey, we're covering the legislature. We should be watching it.
Yeah.
Damn it. I think I'm the only one who does, but hey, somebody has to. And then, you know, I've been feeding stuff to Alexa, that whatever the three guys aren't covering, I've been sending stuff to Alexa about it for her summary. So she's on to the election bills, which are probably gonna be, in fact, they are gonna be on the Senate agenda for tomorrow. Okay. And I don't know when they're going to actually introduce the citizens arrest bills, but I'll keep an eye out for that. It'll probably be introduced by one of the floor leaders tomorrow. And if not, you know, she can just say that, just base her statement on the governor's press conference.
And Ken has a couple of floor leaders that work directly for his proposals. Is that correct?
Yes. I posted something about this because it was hilarious. He's got, for some reason, he chose a freshman senator to be one of his floor leaders. And so and they presented a bill today as having to do with teachers. It's not a big deal bill. I mean, they're going to put the teacher of the year on the school board for a year, and some other, you know, things to try to enhance the prestige of teachers. And one of his floor leaders is a freshman for some reason, and he's from South Georgia, and his wife's this teacher, so they got him to do the presentation. And this was his first presentation, so they roasted him. It was hilarious. You know, they were reading rules and asking him questions that he had no way of knowing the answer to, and just giving him a really hard time. It was hilarious.
Was it partisan or was it in fun?
It was in fun. It was hilarious. It was very much in fun.
Okay.
And he took it very well because he knew that was coming. You know what I mean? And I think it's the sort of thing that they would have done with anybody, but particularly the governor's floor leader, you know? It was fun to watch. It only lasted about 15 minutes, but it was enough to make him feel a little uncomfortable, you know, especially, you know, they were doing things like, isn't it a conflict of interest because your wife's a teacher? You know, she might possibly be the teacher of the year, and you're setting her up to get this plum assignment, shit like that. It was hilarious. He was trying real hard to be sincere and answer all their questions. And some of the questions were put, like they'd find lines in the bill and ask him questions that he had no way of knowing the answer to, and just giving him grief. It was hilarious. It was so funny. And all the different leaders of the Senate were the ones who were really piling on. And he was, and the lieutenant governor even was reading rules to him about the length of time he had, and just banging his gavel on him. Some guy came up and gave him 4 bottles of water in case he had to sit there for a really long time. And, it just tickled me to death. They were just really, and he was so funny. I don't know. He's a farmer. I think he grows blueberries, and so they were giving him all kinds of farming jokes and stuff.
Do you think it's worth doing a kicker in our week summary about just how this freshman lawmaker got introduced to the Senate today?
Especially somebody who's the floor leader, you think they'd treat him with a little more respect.
I would imagine,
respect at all.
We'd almost need a comment from him of like, how did that go on Tuesday when you got roasted on the floor?
I think I think it would be. I think it's especially if they can find maybe one of the more, like, they wanted to know what his GPA was when he was in college, and is it true that D students can still be a legislator and shit like that? It was hilarious. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Alexis, the host, maybe she can come up with something.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Maybe Alexis could watch it and then reach out to him for comment, and just have that as a light, fun kicker to her weekly report.
Yeah, he was very bemused by the whole thing.
There's our guest speaker. Hi, Bria. Welcome. I think you're on mute still.
There we go. Hello.
How you doing?
I'm good. I need one more cup of coffee, I think, but honestly, still at 80%. This is good.
I think I'm on my about 4th cup of coffee, maybe more. So I'm at a target heart rate now. We're really happy to have you join us today. We've got a pretty big group of folks, but
iced coffee.
That's Carolyn Carlson there. She's really the brain trust of this operation. She's keeping us moving forward at a speed that would not be possible without her. But she's a former legislative reporter for AP, former press secretary for the lieutenant governor, and then a faculty emeritus here at Kennesaw State. And she's the trifecta on our team. And we're gonna have a host of students chiming in here, and if we start at 2 o'clock, it'll be a miracle because our students will be trickling in. I know you've got kind of a tight schedule, Bria. How late do you have to go till today before you got to transition out?
Actually, all the chaos happened this morning. I had 3 recordings.
Awesome.
I think it was 3. I just wrote a story on I've been struggling to type like my first draft, so I just wrote the whole story like by hand. So like, all the chaos has already happened.
Okay, good. I'm gonna have Kelly introduce you since she probably knows you best, and I'm definitely gonna hit on some of your experience with covering the legislature, teaching audio recording to the AJC reporters, what your workflow is for just developing a weekly podcast. And really, some of your skills on production, but also reporting, getting sources, et cetera, just some general journalistic stuff. And then I'll probably ask you a little bit about your startup that you had. It was with the Black Sportswoman or something to that effect. Did I get that right?
That's exactly it.
Okay. And I've told the students that I want them to come in with lots of good questions, and to give you a little bit of background from them. We're going to have 2 groups of students on this call. One group of students is producing a weekly podcast that drops every Friday. That's kind of a wrap up of the week's action at the legislature. And then the other group of students are working on digital stories that are legislative based. And so picking out bills and topics that are ongoing so they can report on those bills. So we may get a variety of different questions from the students, but I think certainly with your background, there's going to be, good material to share with them. And who knows, there may even be somebody who's got some questions about your sporting background.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really happy to have you. So thank you for joining us. Let me see who all we got here on our meeting so far. We got 9 folks. Who are we missing? Is that Jeremy on the 706? No, Jeremy said he can't come. Who's 706?
It's me, John.
Oh, okay. Hey, John. And then we got
How you doing?
Alexa, Addison, Darian, Jason, Joe, Kate. Is that everybody?
Jeremy's not. Jeremy? Where's Jeremy?
Jeremy said he can't come because he's covering a meeting and has an interview for stories. And I said, that's fine. Just update us in podcast how things are going in the Slack channel. So he sounds like he's off and running, though. It sounds like everything was happening concurrently to this meeting. So I said, that's fine. And we're recording it so we can share with him Bria's insights and he can catch up afterwards. I think that's everybody. So with that, I'm gonna pass the mic over to Kelly and let her introduce our esteemed guest.
Hello. Well, so obviously Bria and I work together at the AJC. She has been there for about 3 years now and is just a podcast guru, which was kind of the main reason we wanted her to come in and speak today. But also she's a very talented writer, an awesome person, very into horoscopes too. She would love to talk to you about your signs and everything. But so she's very interested. She's done a lot of sports writing and covered the Dream for us in Atlanta. We really didn't have any coverage on the WNBA until Bria kind of spearheaded that effort. She's geared up and gotten podcasts in the newsroom going. She has taught longtime reporters how to record audio and what podcasts are, and oftentimes those reporters might not have been so eager. So she is awesome at finessing that too, but she's just an all-around great person and she's got a lot of advice to share, so I'll let her take it away.
Okay, yeah, Bria, why don't you give us a little bit of background about how you got to this point, and then we'll dive into just the weeds of how you do what you do.
Okay, well, first, thank you, Kelly. I'm like, wow, it feels so amazing. But so background, I'm from Louisiana and I grew up reading the Times-Picayune, and that was like my paper. And I've always loved media, even though I didn't realize it. Since the pandemic started, I've been thinking and reminiscing and stuff, and I've always loved media, and the Times-Picayune was obviously like a great newspaper. So I went to LSU for 2010 to 2014. In high school, I decided I wanted to be Pam Oliver, and that didn't work out because I didn't like being on TV. But in college, I worked in sports media or just student media, TV station, newspaper, radio, just to try out everything. And then eventually for the athletic department. And then once I graduated, I worked at the Advocate covering Southern football and high school sports while working at a nonprofit, the sickle cell, like the Baton Rouge Sickle Cell Foundation. So from there, I worked at the EBR school system and then WFB TV, a TV station, and then got my first full-time job with benefits in journalism, January 2016. So 5 years ago, I began working in local news. So it was a local newspaper owned by Gannett and doing a lot of digital and social media producing, but also that's when I started working in audio because that was kind of the hot thing. It was a couple years after Serial and everyone was like audio. And then I love music and sounds. So I really like hearing people's voices and their emotions when they talk about things. Like it really it was very intimate, like just interviewing local people in Greenville, South Carolina. And eventually I wrote stories there too, but eventually I got to the AJC, hired for the political team specifically to work on like their social media and mostly, digital stuff, but to launch the politics podcast, which launched in 2018. So a midterm year, it launched February, or launched March 2018, because we launched during qualifying or right around qualifying. And that is probably something I still can't believe that we did, because just when you think about Georgia and just how big of a deal Georgia is politically, like all the time, it's just, I can't believe it. But that's when that started. So since I've been at the AJC, I've been writing, producing, less digital stuff now. We leave that to Kelly, she's the expert there, but focusing on writing and producing podcasts, and that's really the main things I work on. But now I kind of moved away from producing special podcasts, like we were doing a lot of series before, and now I work with multiple podcasts. So just keeping those running, and also teaching people that want to learn how to do audio things, because a lot of people want to, but for me, that's easy. So just guiding people, coaching people is a pretty fun thing right now, because everyone loves everyone wants job security. So to help people learn a skill that they think will help them is pretty cool. But yeah, that's my little journey.
Bria, I want to step back for a minute and really focus on something that I think is important for these students. Several of these students are going to be graduating in the next 3 to 6 to 12 months. It sounds like, from what I heard you say, that you spent the first several years of your career on the hustle, like working the freelance train, like working side gigs, like just really getting whatever experience you can at a variety of news sources or news organizations before you landed your first full-time gig at the Greenville paper. You want to talk just a little bit about maybe how these students might want to prepare their mindset and, for the road ahead to break into this industry?
I think I actually wish people told me that in college, because I graduated from a mass comm school. So like a lot of people went into the journalism industry. This is 2014, but I wish people said, like, it is difficult but possible, and you have to be strategic about the jobs you take. And there are definitely things you're not going to want to do. Like, I had to move from Louisiana to South Carolina. Is not really across the country. It's only like 11-hour drive, but I didn't realize how necessary that was before I had to do it almost 2 years after I graduated. But one thing that they really liked when I was getting hired, I had a blog. I can't remember what it's called now. But I would go, so I was covering Southern football, but in my free time, like I would go to their events and like take pictures and post stuff. And just, I interviewed one of my former class. I worked for the LSU women's basketball team for a little bit doing media stuff. And I interviewed one of the former players who was playing in France professionally, because they had like different attacks and stuff like that. So I interviewed her about her experience being there and like not being at home, and put that on the blog too. And that really set me apart from everyone else that's trying to get a job or knows a person and stuff like that. So yeah, I think more now, like looking back, I wish I was more strategic with the hustle, because I think if I was, didn't burn myself out a little early, I'd kind of be able to handle the pandemic's hard regardless, but be able to handle where I kind of, everything that led up to everything shutting down. But even if you don't have your ideal job, I think doing something on the side to prove that you know how to do the thing is going to set you apart. And even if that's not a second job, I think, I know everyone has to make money, but even if it's not a second job and you just have something to show that you're qualified, or that you can get qualified, or you can take initiative, people really like initiative and like entrepreneurial spirits, in terms of like not necessarily have to, follow a certain structure. People love that. So yeah, the strategy part, I think, will also save us, like health-wise and mentally.
Well, it sounds like you really kind of focused on, there was a trend happening on the heels of the Serial podcast and the success of Serial, to know that audio was an opportunity that you could move into that lane and own that lane. And that would make you, that would give you some a value proposition over the competition and make you more marketable and give you skills that other organizations were wanting at the time.
And veteran journalist Grant Wall, he left Sports Illustrated, but he created a podcast. So interviewing different people in soccer around the world so he can stay relevant. So everyone, even if it's video, because I mean, I watch a lot of videos. There's this YouTube channel called The Take, and it's all about like tropes in like movies and films, and it's so good. But like even videos like TikToks too. So like I think creating things that are relevant to what you want to be doing, even if you aren't doing those for work, is still going to set you apart. I just saw someone, I was on Twitter, probably shouldn't have been on Twitter, but she created a TikTok about how she wanted to work for the NPR Code Switch podcast. And then the Code Switch team saw it because someone put that TikTok on Twitter, and everyone's like, she's probably going to be the next NPR Code Switch intern. So just things that are also in your interest, in your skill set, they don't necessarily have to be like, these long form stories or these big things that take production, but a lot of the times those things that you can do to set you apart, you already know how to do. It just takes putting yourself out there.
That's great advice. As I mentioned, our students here are on week 6 of a brand new podcast called the Gold Dome Debrief. Prior to them producing this podcast, I'm just gonna make a blanket assumption here that most of them really didn't have a great idea about what the legislature does or how it does it, and how to follow a bill and Robert's rules or anything to that effect. And now we're 6 weeks into this, and they know a whole lot more now than they did at the beginning of January. But it sounds to me like when you came over from South Carolina to the AJC, you launched a similar, project, a podcast in the middle of qualifying that now has become a signature brand of the news organization. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like for you, how you got up to speed with it, how you learned what you learned? Just can you walk us through that process a little bit and give us your 5 cents of free advice?
So I will say I was in the same boat where I was like, I have no idea what's happening. Georgia is chaotic. I thought Louisiana was chaotic in terms of like the way everything works. It's so funny. But I think the first thing I decided, well, the great thing is I work with Greg Bluestein. So he is like always moving and always is willing to give advice. But I think being able to watch him work, and the whole politics team in general, they're so efficient and knowledgeable. I think that made it easier for me because I didn't have to know everything, because they're the experts. But the main thing was creating, and we're all over the place now because of all the different podcasts I'm doing in the pandemic, and like we don't necessarily only post on Mondays, but create a set schedule of when we're going to post or when we're going to share the podcast. The second thing was, I can't remember, there was a point where people in public radio reached out to me to help me basically produce the audio better. And even when I reach out now, they're so friendly because that's what they do for a living. And I was just kind of like learning on the fly, which is kind of scary, but kind of cool. Like when I think about it, I'm like, I can't believe like we were doing this. So create a set schedule, creating a format, but you can change the format, but at least testing it out for like a month or two and getting feedback from people. Also, I think one thing I really learned, especially about politics, because it's such important information, creating headlines and podcast titles that people would have interest in, because some things they may not have interest in, but it's super important. And that part is actually very hard for me, but I spend a lot of time and also sometimes I do cheat and ask Greg because he's actually better at this than me, but figuring out the best way to get people to click on it without making it an incorrect. Because there was one, I don't know, remember Casey Cagle, he was lieutenant governor running for governor, and there was a secret recording and all this stuff. And I used the word controversy in I think I used the word controversy, and I had to change it because that was just not accurate. People were probably emailing Greg like, get it together or something, when it was me that created the headline. So the number one thing is having a set schedule, making the information digestible and understandable for people that are not politics, I would say politics heads, but like basically like that. And then the third thing is finding a way to get feedback. So asking at the beginning of the episode, before people drop off, like, breakdown does this a lot. Join the Facebook group, or just, you can just say, email your suggestions or any feedback, or tweet it using this hashtag, stuff like that. And in terms of growing the audience, I kind of looked at what other podcasts, I think everyone does this in different mediums, but looking at what other people are doing, like how are they promoting it? What can I do on a budget that's kind of like what Ira Glass's team at This American Life is doing, and stuff like that. But I think keeping an eye on what people are doing promotion wise, especially as someone who's not a promotions person, is also very helpful.
Okay. Can you describe to us what a typical week looks like for you? And what it sounds like, what I'm hearing from you is that you work with the reporters who are already reporting on the Capitol, and then you get them in to record their stories, their audio, work with their scripts, put it all together. Like you're the producer that brings it all home. Is that right?
Yes, yes, and editing it as well. But by the time we're editing, that's like easier because I think coordinating with busy people, and especially with, there's such a fragile like time frame. Like if something happens, something really could happen in Georgia at any moment that kind of throws everything off. And going into this, I was a person, well, I still am a person who loves a good schedule and doing a certain thing at a certain time. And I had to get out of that because we don't have a set recording time anymore, because it's impossible. It's been impossible for about 2 years. But usually, so I'll give this week as an example, because I do work on Access Atlanta, which is a podcast that can be more, we can work on that weeks ahead of time. So so I got back to work this week because I was off last week, but Monday I'm kind of figuring out what's going on. Like since I was off last week, I had no idea what happened. I have no idea what's going on like nationally or locally. So I just figure out what's going on. I let Greg know I'm back and all this stuff. So trying to just get my bearings. Tuesday I had 2 podcast recordings for Access Atlanta. A lot of times I don't have to schedule those anymore because Access Atlanta is a podcast from our features department, and they have their own, the host basically schedules those, the recordings. The reporter sometimes does too. There's a lot of moving parts for that one, but my schedule is usually filled with like, this week I have 2 recordings a day for Access Atlanta. So today we decided that our podcast for Political Georgia, I reached out to Greg. Okay, so what's the most important thing that is going on? Because to me, when I come back, when I'm off for a week, I have no idea what is like the thing that is, there's so many important things. I can hardly, 1 second. Sorry about that. To me, there's so many things that are happening at once in Georgia. I can never tell like what's the thing that like the governor may be concerned about or getting yelled at about or something like that. So I'm like, okay, Greg, what is the most important thing happening? Because I think it's this, or this, if this could be this. And sometimes he's like, yeah, it's that. Or sometimes he's like, no, it's this thing that I personally, Bria, hadn't thought of. So this week we're talking about the voting rights restrictions bills that are moving around the Capitol. So Greg, as you know, has this crazy schedule. So I go, and since we don't have, lately we've been recording on Fridays after he finishes radio, 10:15, 11 a.m. So then I reach out to the reporter who is the expert on this topic, and then I set up a recording, and then prepare an outline of the thing I love about my perspective as the person that's not the expert is I'm going to be thinking of questions that a listener is going to be thinking of because they also aren't an expert because they don't cover this every day. So I created an outline of things that we definitely should talk about, or we definitely should hit, or these questions, like make sure you mention this because I know people don't know this. And then we record, and I do 2 edits for each, 3 edits for Access Atlanta because there's usually more moving parts because there's more audio that I'm adding in and stuff. But so Friday for politics, we record and edit it again, and then Monday, that's when that goes live. That's in a perfect world, but that's usually how it goes, unless there's breaking news, like when Tia was at the Capitol during the riots. I think we were supposed to record that day, and then we ended up recording the next day or the day after that. That ended up changing, but yeah. So usually we don't do same day. I don't put it up the same day because it takes, unless it's like super urgent. But yeah, usually it's the next day, and then I try to do Mondays for politics. And for Access Atlanta, that comes out every Thursday. And since we recorded, I think we had 3 recordings today, so we're ahead for like 3 weeks for that. So it's kind of chaotic though.
So for your politics cast though, if you're dropping that on Monday, is it a summation of the previous week's reporting?
So in ways it is. In a lot of ways it is. So it's not necessarily, it's like, so usually we have a topic. So this week is going to be like voting rights restrictions that are being put up. But I know, so Greg likes to follow the outline, but sometimes he doesn't like to follow the outline. So I know it's going to be voting rights restrictions, but they're also going to be talking about the citizens arrest things that happen, but they're not going to be the focal point. So we do, in a lot of ways, they do talk about the things that happened this week, but it's kind of like, those podcasts where like it's about a topic, but usually it starts with a story about one person and then breaks out to talk about a larger issue. It's kind of like that, unless there usually are not that many circumstances. Like like the Capitol riot, for example, Tia being there, that was like a example of when it would just be about that. But usually a lot of things end up coming out, or end up being talked about. But for the most part, it's that one big issue, and they talk about everything else that happened, and then what's going to happen next with that big issue, like moving forward. So it's a recap, but not. I mean, part of the reason that's beneficial is to get people drawn in instead of like, here's what happened this week. Here's something that's going on that you need to know about, but also here's other things that happen that may come up, or that are kind of interesting that we wrote about that are also online, and then what's going to happen next with this thing that people care a lot about.
Okay. I want to dive into some production techniques, if you will. It's a 2-part question. How do you actually record with Greg or any other hosts, or not hosts, but guests on your show? Is it remote? What kind of gear? What kind of microphone? What kind of software? And then pivot maybe to what are the skills that you've been sharing with the broader newsroom about audio reporting, and maybe share some of those best practices.
So I don't know. Oh, I have a Rode mic that we used to use in studio, and I love that mic. I don't know why, I just feel so passionately about that mic. But since we're remote, and we actually started recording the politics podcast remote a couple weeks before everything closed, because Greg was in South Carolina, they were in Alabama, they were like all over the place. So we started using Zencastr, which is like an audio only program, but Zencastr has been giving me so many problems. So what we're doing now is testing out Zoom, but I've done this for a while, even with Zencastr, and apparently public radio does this too. So we'll be on this call, and I'm just as an example. So I'll be recording like a voice memo like this, or like this, depending on what makes me more comfortable. And it just sounds so good. It sounds so good. So that's how we record remotely for all the podcasts, because luckily, we were recording remotely from a couple weeks before everything shut down. And we used to do that with guests. So the entertainment features team, they'll talk to people that just entertainers around the world for the podcast, for the Access Atlanta podcast, and they wouldn't be in Georgia. So I'd get them to join Zencastr and record the quality Zencastr through the Rode mic, using that, connecting that, and then getting the other person's sound through Zencastr. And depending on how technically savvy they were, getting them to also record a voice memo. But with entertainers, they're like, you can't have my phone number. So that one, it just depends on the person. So that's how we record everything now. But I'm testing out Zoom because Zencastr is just too many updates. But it's kind of, Zencastr has been what I've been using for the last year. But something that is also good is to have video for people that don't want to listen. Some people just like to watch the podcast as it happens, especially since we're all remote now. It's pretty easy to put that up on YouTube and make it like searchable on YouTube and stuff. And that's really how we record now, but I'm still trying to figure out the best audio option. But no matter what, the phone is amazing for recording, even if you're just on the phone with each other if you don't have two phones, or like connected with each other in some way and then recording through your phone. That is up there a lot of times with like these $100, $150 mics. And that's what I do with, I had a series maybe April of last year about like the different areas that the pandemic was affecting. Like I got Christian Boone to talk about the way that it was affecting prisons, people, grocery shopping, housing, the economy, and all this stuff. So a lot of those reporters, sports, a lot of those reporters have never like recorded on a podcast. I never interacted with them or anything. So I just sent out a pitch and this is what you'd have to do. And I sent a voice memo example and then a script example. And I just said, I sent a link. I can send the link to you too, but it's basically the way NPR records. There is a step-by-step guide on how to record your podcast, or how to record a voice memo that you're going to use for an NPR podcast. And it's just, you talk like this with the voice memo running, or like this, and then you send it in. And that's what they did. And I think with working with people that don't necessarily use audio all the time, just providing an example or step-by-steps, or with anything really, if it's video or anything, but providing the step-by-steps and making it as simple and straightforward as possible is really helpful. And also, I find it crazy that they always are like, well, if it doesn't sound great, you can send it, I can send it over, but I'm like, they always sound great. I think they just assume that they don't sound great because they haven't done it before. So I always make sure to like, make sure they know that they sound good, or like, if we do have to fix something, fix this. But for the most part, everything is fine. They just assume that they aren't doing a great job because they haven't done it before.
Okay. And so you don't have to do much with, oh, thank you for that link, Kelly. You don't have to do much in post-production to clean up that audio when it comes over?
It depends. I always try to say record in a quiet room, but some people don't. But if I do, I just, I do it depends on how much noise, because sometimes I can just do the noise reduction. And I use Audition, so sometimes I use the noise reduction. Sometimes I do, if it's like, so I haven't had this in a while, luckily, but if it's so bad, I might have to do, or if it's like a consistent or inconsistent background noise, maybe construction, do, I think it's de-reverb, but I usually like test it out. But I Google or YouTube a lot of things. Like one time, for Breakdown, I had to figure out how to do a bleep. And I had to do that on YouTube because I was like, I have no idea how to do this, but I have to do this because it was a Ahmaud Arbery episode. And I was like, and they had the, I think it was a courtroom or it was something where I was like, I had to figure out how to do a bleep. But I just YouTubed it because I had no idea how to do it.
That's what I tell my students all the time, is that they ask me something I don't know, the first thing I'm gonna do is YouTube it. And so, they all have access to Google too. So thankfully, that for any question I think that exists in the world, somebody has answered it on Google or YouTube.
And a lot of veteran people, I would watch the video person look up stuff on YouTube too. And I was like, oh wait, I didn't know this just because, I'm not advanced enough, or like, it's hard to know everything about like a software program that you've used only for like a year. So
And it updates every year. So even though you may have known it, backwards and forwards, then there's new updates, new features, you're constantly learning, constantly changing. I want to pitch to our group here. I've dominated much of this conversation. Do we have some questions for our guest today from any of you? We got Alexa coming in, or okay, go ahead,
Alexa.
Kate. We'll go to Alexa.
Okay. Bria, so you mentioned how like you basically started in sports, and I know you run that podcast now. And I was just curious, how hard was it to, I guess, go from sports like that, like sort of mentality of covering them, into developing a podcast directed around politics? Like how is the dynamic so like different, and how are you able to like kind of work with it, I guess?
I think the biggest thing, or the biggest difference, well, I'm really glad that I got to work in politics as closely as I did. I don't report or work as closely, but I'm really glad to learn that type of reporting. And sports, I don't know, it's all reporting, you have to verify your facts, but I think it's different when you have to do like policies and learn about like public documents and like all this stuff that will also benefit sports reporting. But I think the biggest thing, the biggest difference was not only just going from sports. I think I had a big jump going from sports to local news in Greenville. And this is kind of similar because I'm like, I don't know anything about this town. I don't want to say this thing is here. Like I don't know if I've ever been to South Carolina before that. Like the adjustment part was extremely hard there. But then when moving to Georgia, I think there was one day, who was the person that passed away? I think his name might have been it was a person that you all will know. And I think maybe he was in charge of the Georgia lottery. It was somebody that passed away. And I was like, I have no idea what this man looks like. And there was a picture and there were two people in the picture. I'm like, I have no idea what this person looked like. I think the learning curve was having so much information that was important. And if you messed it up, that's actually like really
that was
more
like
detrimental
the
than
thing that I'm trying to like understand is like if you get one thing wrong, then that just like complicates.
Yes, it's much more intense and more high pressure because of the stakes, and it's mostly the stakes because sports is kind of like. But the biggest
there's either a winner, there's a loser in sports, but then in politics, it's like.
And then there's so much context too that you don't know. So I think what I do this all the time because I feel like my anxiety is less when I like over prepared. So I do a lot of like Googling, and if there's a street name, well, there's a lot of street, but like if there's a street name, or I'm like, I've seen this name a lot. I wonder who this person is, especially with Georgia politics, because there's just so many people. Like I'm still learning things today. And then another thing was I had the privilege of being able to ask my coworkers who've been doing this, like Jim Galloway was doing this for 40 years, and he was so nice. I'm like, oh, what does this mean? Like, what is happening? Or how do people feel about this person? Like when I was in South Carolina, I'd ask them like, so Strom Thurmond, I've heard of this name before. How do people feel about him? And he was like, it depends on who you ask. And then I realized who Strom Thurmond was. And I'm like, oh yeah, it does depend on who you ask. So a lot of like asking questions, and it's hard to Google because Google, I feel like you have to have a starting point already of like knowing what you're looking for, but reading a lot. Like I didn't know about the Atlanta race riots until the Capitol riot happened. Somebody wrote a story about it. So a lot of researching and learning, and just being okay with that you don't know everything, because I feel like there's a lot of pressure, especially for young people, to feel like they have to know everything just to contribute, because I felt that pressure before too. But just keep reading and trying to research as much as you can. And then interviews also help a lot because they want to talk. And if you ask, like one of my coworkers, she's the it's like healthcare, but like healthcare and policy reporter, Ariel Hart, she was like, I'm never afraid to ask a dumb question because I'd rather you tell me everything than for me to assume that I know anything and then not get it right. So yeah.
I like that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really happy you brought that up because, and I want to pivot to you, Alexa, but I just want to point out that I've seen this in almost every single class I've ever taught. Students are afraid to not know. And I think for all the reasons that Bria just brought up, that, you know, they feel this pressure to know everything. And that's where a lot of mistakes happen because students won't ask the questions or they try to write around a topic that they don't thoroughly understand and they introduce mistakes into their copy or they just gloss over a really big issue that they just didn't clearly understand. And so we've already talked to you a lot about making sure before you go into an interview that you've thoroughly read and researched the topic, you've read the bill, you actually know about the history of the lawmaker, where they come from, et cetera. But, you know, don't be afraid to say, my job is to explain this somewhat complex process to, you know, a very broad audience. And that audience, you know, let's just assume that they have an 8th grade reading level. Can you please dumb this down for me in the most simplistic terms so that I can describe it to my audience? And if you don't understand it, there's no way that you're going to be able to describe it to your audience clearly. And, you know, concurrently, I would say that the further you get along in this industry, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And the more confident you become to say, I don't get that. Can you please walk that back and just really lay it out for me? Because I don't get it. And so it takes confidence to say, I don't understand, but that's where you want to get to because, you know, you don't want to ever be afraid to ask a dumb question. And some people are going to punch down at you and that's okay. You know what, if somebody comes and punches down at you because you're asking them to clarify, that's their problem, not yours. But make sure you do your homework and your research up front. Alexa, what do you have?
I'm always just curious about a reporter's like work-life balance. Like, are you a 9 to 5 or midnight? And how do you balance, you know, your personal life with also like side hustle endeavors? And then also, I'm one of those people that wants to know everything. And having a team of editors makes me confident to put out stuff in this outlet. But when I'm pursuing stuff on my own and I have no one to tell me like that's wrong, do this different, I lack the confidence to put that kind of stuff out there. So how do you get past that?
Well, that last part, so I have insane levels of anxiety when I have the Black sportswoman, and that's just me. And so it's just like, I have verified this as much as I can. The only reason I probably put it out is because I have the platform already and people have already asked and I've already started it, but the levels of anxieties, you just have to try, and it really doesn't sound helpful. Like I feel anxious like in my chest just saying that, but it really is just, you just have to do it. But as long as you do it to your best of your ability, and it's hard to say like, you know, what other people say doesn't matter because they're not even putting themselves out there either. But it doesn't feel that helpful, but it is true because they're not putting themselves out there. They're just being mean on the internet. And a lot of times, actually, knock on wood, haven't had anybody say anything mean like sportswoman or anything. But that part, you just have to put yourself out there. But as long as you fact check to your best of your ability, you're good. But I have that same every week. I have that same level of like, oh, I really wish I had an editor because editors are so awesome. But in terms of work-life balance, this is a great question. So 2018 was like my first full year, like, you know, doing all the politics things and just traveling everywhere. Like there was one day we went to Stacey Abrams, Elizabeth Warren, and Ayanna Pressley. The same night we went to Donald Trump Jr. and Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens. It was a chaotic day. That was in Athens, and the first one was in Forest Park or Morrow. And that was kind of like representative of like 2018 for me. Like election night, I was in Athens until like 3 a.m. So my personal life, so I'm married. My personal life was like not good then. So 2019, I decided I'm going to make friends at work. So I have friends at work now. I don't think I started talking to Kelly until 2019. I'm pretty sure I didn't. But because I had to personally decide that, because I spent so much time trying to be in the journalism industry. I wanted it so bad. But then I realized like I was kind of rushing. Like I was trying to find success in 3 years or like 4 years, or success because it's really relative about like what you want. But I think a lot, I spent so much time working because I was trying to rush into like what I thought was making it. And now 2019, I started making friends, started going places. It was, well, friends are my sisters. I do have like built-in friends, but that was like, I had to make an effort. And I still, 2020, right before I went, my friend had her birthday right before everything shut down. So like March, I think March 8th was her birthday, but like March 6th and 7th, we were all hanging out and eating out and like, oh my gosh. And then March 8th, I went to Greenville, South Carolina to cover the SEC women's basketball tournament. So I found a way to like do all the things that I wanted to do. And then March 9th, I used to live in downtown Decatur. Me and my husband, we went, like we used to like to go eat out and like just go and be in downtown. So like I found a way to like, but I have to try hard. Like I have to try hard to build in the rest too, because I'm doing all of these things. But I think for me, it's about how I start things. Like with the Black Sportswoman, I'm like, I am not doing multiple stories a week. I don't want to set that expectation. But yes, I think it's hard when you're first starting out because you're just trying to like prove yourself. But I had to make an effort. I can't even pretend like I don't still have to make an effort because but oh, one thing I do want to say is I also had to learn how to not connect like my identity and my worth into with like work and what I produce and what I put out, because there's so much you can't control. Like you can control like how hard you try in terms of like preparedness for what you have, or like, you know, like your effort, but you can't control like what people say, whether you're hired and all that stuff. And it also most of the time, it doesn't have anything to do with you as a person if they don't hire you, because a lot of times you might be just the interview they had to check off because they were hiring somebody, but they had to like go through these hoops. Or sometimes, a lot of times it's also a blessing. Like there's so many jobs I look back now, like I'm so glad I didn't move to Connecticut. Like, oh my goodness. So those are two things that I've learned a lot. And it's only been like 7 years since I've been in the industry too. So
Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely advice I needed like right now.
yeah, it took me, so I graduated in May 2014. And then it took me until August 1st, July 31st to get just a reporting job. And it was freelance. And I think, so I was still part-time working at the athletic department, the like LSU athletic department, but you would just see everyone else getting jobs. You would see like people that you were like classmates with, and you're just like, how many jobs? Like I traveled to Atlanta on the megabus to try to get a job. No one in Atlanta would hire me, and I'm still, I'm not gonna be mad about that. But you would just see all these things, and then it was just so hard to like. I'm like, I thought I worked hard enough. I thought I did this, but it's so much. I don't want to be woo-woo, like Kelly said about my astrology, but it's like all the stuff that whatever happens, happens. I can control what I control, and I'm going to choose to be grateful for whatever opportunity comes my way that I want to accept. And I'm glad, there's a few things that I'm glad I didn't accept, but that is also hard when you're looking for like money. But it's just, there's nothing wrong with you if it takes 2 years to get a full-time job, because that's how long it took me.
Which I mean, I think that's important to point out. You had the hustle going for a couple of years, but now you're at one of the most respectable news organizations in the country, and you really haven't been in the industry that long. So I think, you know, your story of tenacity and perseverance, you know, don't give up and accept the little wins along the way, and, you know, try not to get down about the things you can't control. But I think all of you should expect to have 50 rejection letters along the way. I mean, that's just part of the game. Like, you're going to apply to a lot of jobs you're not going to get. And that's okay, because every cover letter you write and every email you make, every phone call that you reach out to somebody, that's an opportunity for networking and an opportunity to get better at networking and writing your cover letters and getting a foot in the door.
And I will say, he won't care, but my husband, we were in Greenville. He started out working as the paper delivery person, paper. I can't think of what I'm trying to say, but basically the person that delivered the papers. And he ended up, before we left Greenville, was reporting the crime reporter, wrote a story, investigative piece that got people like arrested, like crimes, like how it was like a real estate scam they were doing, was covering the sheriff and all this stuff. So I will say, like, it does feel, I really wish I would have changed my mindset earlier about like how long it feels, because it's really not that long, but it just feels like nothing is working out. It just feels like no one's paying attention. But I think consistency is the one thing I wish I would have had before, because yeah, I would stop after 2 months and like, no one's listening. Well, you didn't give him a chance to listen, Bria. So that's, and now he works at CNN. So it's all like it feels like this. And I don't know how to describe that, but that's what it feels like when you're in this industry. But yeah, what keeps me motivated, I think having a why is also good, because what keeps me motivated is like I was talking about the Take That YouTube channel. I cannot believe each day I learn more about like the way media shapes the way we think about everything. And I want to have a role in providing a good quality version of that, adding context and like not repeating the same mistakes, but also undoing or acknowledging some of the harm that media organizations have done to various communities. So, but it still blows my mind how much media shapes everything and the way we think about everything. So that's my why. But having that also helps too. But it took me until maybe November 2020 to realize what my why was.
That is great advice, Bria. Who else? We're coming in on 50 minutes, and maybe we can keep her till about 3 o'clock. I know she's got a day job to get back to. We got a couple other questions from our students here.
Yeah, I definitely have something I wanted to ask. One of the things that we've been talking about, just I guess in your line of professionalism, is I guess the balancing plate between networking and getting, contacts for people within your respective career field, as well as creating your own platform and having like your own place to say your kind of, I don't know, air your grievances, have your own, I guess, place where you have that space available to you. But my question is, from coming from students in our position currently, what would you argue is the more, I guess, pertinent thing we should focus more on? Is it more, attending a lot of these meetings where we do have networking opportunities, or should we really just be, busting our backsides and getting a YouTube channel up or creating our own podcast file, something like that?
This is a great conundrum. I feel like this is one of those, it's a balance, because I feel like I learned a lot, because the most important thing about starting your own thing or practicing on the side is the quality part. And I feel like I learned a lot of the quality part at the AJC. And I think if I would have started this before, I would have been thinking about the wrong things in terms of, well, not necessarily a blog, because I blog or something that's more just practice. I kind of could do what I want. But if I would have started the Black Sportswoman specifically before this current patch of time I am in, I don't think I would focus as much as on quality, interviewing the people I'm talking about instead of just talking about them. And also just, I have just much different understanding of the way sports media works. And a lot of my goal is to create these new narratives, but also impact the sports industry and get other people writing about these athletes. And I think if I would have started this in like 2017, I would have been looking to try to quit my job and start something that will make me money. But I think this is such a great question, because I think another reason I've started this was because there's just nothing like this in sports media. And I spent a lot of time thinking I was going to go to different places and change it, when everything that I thought was wrong about the sports media coverage, especially specifically of Black women, started like way up here, and I'm here. And I feel like that wasn't a productive use of my energy. But I think starting out, I think do a little bit of both, but as I was saying before, like be more strategic about it. What's something that's simple to you that you can do in your area of like interest that you might not necessarily be working in that doesn't necessarily conflict? What's something interesting you can do that's simple that it'll take time but not overtake your life?
Well, I mean, that's part of the why for me as to why I keep, pursuing journalism. A lot of times, I mean, media narratives around African American folk. I mean, come on, do I really need to spill it out? But at the same time, wanting to have like being that diamond in the rough to kind of like buck the orthodoxy of, saying that this is a perspective, this is a philosophy, perhaps that's just not even reflected in the mainstream. So that's kind of like the why as to why I want to do something as like a side project in the meantime, because uh, unapologetically pro-black politics is problematic depending on which circles you're in or whichever corporate circle you're trying to run for. So I definitely agree with you on that bit. It's just I guess it's something that I guess it's like a personal life thing that a journey that you go on and try to figure out where you can kind of flex your muscle in certain spaces and learn where you need to humble yourself and grow in others.
Oh, yes. Yes. So that's a great point. I think also learning like where with what I know how to do and what I care about most, what version of content would be the best thing for me to make. Because for your example, like if you're doing talking about like black politics, for example, there may be like a lot of podcasts, there may be like a lot of videos. There could even be a lot of TikToks. TikTok is like so addictive. I have to like delete the app. It's just, but I think I did this Google News like boot camp, and the first thing was like figuring out your unique value proposition, like your unique, what do you bring? And this is also good for applying for jobs too, but what do you bring specifically to this concept that may be saturated, which is cults, because I think everyone has a unique perspective. And some people don't like the way people's voice sounds and they won't listen to them. So what do you bring specifically? And then who is the target audience, like demographic that would pay attention to this or who needs this? And then where are they? And then that kind of helps you decide like where the content should be and what kind of content it should be. Like if I'm talking to people in my sisters, which would also be your age group, definitely not Facebook. Twitter maybe, but Twitter is just kind of like chaos. So like, do I want to be on Twitter anyway? But TikTok, I was surprised that people cared about like Black history when I was posting about like these Black women athletes. I was so shocked. But that's getting the information out there, but also showing people that I know how to make a TikTok if I get like another, I'm not a social media person, but if I wanted to apply for that, that shows that I know how to use social media, but also that I have experience like researching Black history, which helps me get another job, but also adds value to a space that I'm already annoyed. Like, no one's talking about these people. It's like a little bit of doing the work and being the change with also like proving yourself, which will benefit you for whatever job you want to do, whether it is specifically in Black politics or just general politics or local news. It'll all benefit you. And I may or may not have that poster that you have in the back, the black and white one. I think I might have that. Looks like the same handwriting.
I was an organizer with the Georgia Democratic Party. It's a
Yes, I have
black.
that.
Yeah. It was
That's
a
so
gift
cool.
I got. Yeah. Sorry guys, my room is messy.
Yeah, that's so awesome. But yeah, it's like it is a balancing act, and I think that's become one thing I'm super passionate about. Is like, how do we succeed? Because I think young people, even at our newspaper, young people just have such a hard time like proving themselves because everything's changing. So like what we're really good at isn't necessarily what historically has been the thing that you use to succeed at a newspaper. But how do you do that while also not burning yourself out by the time you're 30? So I think hopefully that helped, but I think being strategic from early on, I think will be super, super helpful. And we all have the skills. Anybody who can use social media has skills. Okay, I'm done now.
All right. Anybody else of our students? We got a few other students on here that haven't had a chance to ask a question.
Yeah, I actually do have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
So with what you've been talking a lot about strategies and how you need to basically pick and choose your shots, or when it comes to doing certain things, especially just when you're coming into the field, you have to kind of like bob and weave and figure out what you can do, what you can't do. So I'm more of an investigative journalist, and I know that like even going forward, whether I do a podcast piece over something and it's investigative, like in your opinion, what's the best way to pick and choose? Like, what strategies should I use if I was to cover something that was necessarily a harder topic that kind of entails that I would have like some experience? Like, what would be the best way to go about it? Is what I'm asking.
So outside of connecting with the investigative reporter, if you're at a paper, connecting with or TV station, connecting with those people. But if it's something where this is not your day job, you don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing your ideas with someone else because it all depends on where you work. I think something like a podcast or something to where you don't, because a podcast is difficult, but it's easier than video because you don't necessarily have to have video. But I'm thinking about, it was a public radio podcast, maybe like Beartown or something like that. And that person, he wasn't a investigative reporter. He was just a regular, daily radio reporter. And he didn't get newsroom permission to do the podcast, and it ended up being an award-winning podcast. I think it might have been crime related, and so I didn't necessarily listen to it because crime makes me queasy. But he just did that on the side. And there's some podcast. A lot of the podcasts have this formula, hourglass. There's either the hourglass formula, but there's also just like narration. This is what's happened. Here's a little sound that I could get, and then maybe an interview, and then more narration. There's even one podcast I like. What was it called? Oh, Hollywood in Color. And it was just the producer had an essay she wrote, and she added sound in that she could use because she referenced it, and it was 15 seconds or less. So I think if it is a part, I do understand sometimes you don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing your ideas, but I think practicing that way is still helpful because there's also this group that I met. They're not journalists at all. I think one of them works at Milk, the Politics, a very local to Atlanta politics podcast. And they just follow that public radio formula, and it's good. It's just consuming all the quality also helps shape it just helps you. I don't know why, but for example, when I read a lot, if I'm reading a lot one week and I have to write a story, I'm somewhat a much better writer. It's just their gifts came into me or something. So that's extremely helpful. And then Ira Glass, who's basically everyone who's in public radio that's made it big started under him. And he was just saying it takes I think he said it takes 2 years to find taste or something like that. So just it's okay if the first few things you make that aren't necessarily amazing, because you keep going, because your taste is what you got started, but just getting good at that craft takes a while. But yes, being strategic that way in terms of investigative reporting, and because investigative reporting does take more time, have more pieces, and you are able to fact check still, but with a podcast or something like that, that is, you're still writing, but that will it'll set you apart, but it's also that's something you can put together. And video would be so much harder.
Thanks. That actually really helps kind of narrow down what I was thinking about.
Cool.
Arian, did I see your mic just unmute? You got something coming?
Yes. So with me, I feel like, because I heard a lot about like side projects and side hustles. So I've actually had like an Instagram account made, but like I haven't launched it, I haven't done anything. And I've thought about podcasts. Like I feel like I think of so many ideas that I'm like, this would be great. Like I feel like I have a name for it, like it'd be catchy, like it'd be great. But then I feel like I have so much confidence in it myself. And then when I go like share it with people or talk it to people, like I'm so like, well, you know, like I would do this. I don't know. Like I think it'd be cool. So like, how do you find like the confidence within yourself, kind of tying in with like what Alexa said, but to like actually to just like take the jump? Because I know so many things are like, you just have to take the leap, like you just have to get your toes wet. But like for me, I think it's scary to like get my toes wet right now. So like, how do you like build up your confidence to like finally just like go?
I think, so I've also have a million, well, I only have like 3 domains, but I've changed my Instagram name 50,000 times and like just all this stuff. But I think one thing that really helps me, because I'm similar where like putting on myself out there is exhausting. Like this Zoom call for some reason is just stressing me out. But when I have to ask questions on Zoom calls, it honestly stresses me out. But something that helps me with the Black Sportswoman is since it's not about me, that makes it so much easier. Like I feel it's still sometimes hard to promote and be like, oh, this thing is, you know, you can pay for this, et cetera, et cetera. But like being able to like share the stories, I have much more confidence because it's not about me. I do have like, I've done like, had like YouTube channels and stuff like that. With that, I do think making it not about me in terms of like sharing information, the information is valuable. So like, this is why I'm trying to get you to bring it to your attention. So that I think, especially if the personality is similar to mine, I think finding a way to make it not about you helps a lot, because you don't feel like you're putting yourself out there. Like you're not like physically out there. It's the idea and the person you're writing about, or the thing you're writing about, or the information you're trying to give, or the value that it could be for someone. But yeah, that's the biggest thing that was helpful. Like I know that's because it's like, it's these stories, this is such an important cause and you should know about it. But yeah, that also, I was in the boot camp and somebody was saying how they were worried about, a lot of people were concerned or like stressed out about like making sales. And I want the confidence of this woman, but she was like, I mean, who's gonna bump you up if you don't? And also it's a big thing, so you should get paid and you shouldn't be afraid to ask for money. And it does sound like I have to listen to like songs of affirmation. I listened to one earlier, the I Am song, but once you remember that, it's hard, but like once you remember that, he was like, you know what, I'm just gonna ask, because if I don't ask, who's gonna promote this for me? So, and it's the same with your stories, wherever you do work, or like even if the stuff you do now, this information is important. Whatever is going on at the Capitol is very important. You should know about this. And it's like my pet peeve when people are like, oh, I did this thing and like, maybe you should look at it. I don't know. No, you did the work. It's awesome, and share it. And I think everyone is awesome. So I think everyone should feel that way about their work too. So, okay, I'm done.
Thank you.
Addison, you're the last student on the group that hasn't got to chime in. I don't want to leave without giving you a moment.
Yeah. So you mentioned that audio kind of in 2016, and we talked about this, kind of went through this big growth. And just as an insider, I'm curious if you think that, you know, it's here to stay, like in the future, like where we are now and where we're going, like reporters need to know audio and get acquainted with audio, and like what's it standing like, you know, in the newsrooms? Is the rise like, is it here to stay? You know what I mean?
I think it is here to stay, but I think there's two buts. The first but is I think it depends on how much it is valued. It depends on where it is. I think a lot more is, and it's interestingly enough, like newspaper and startups are the same way in terms of not always valuing podcasts that much and focusing only on like whatever thing is the like the actual newspaper or, you know, something else. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily value it as much, but they still have them. But the other part is, I think what's going to start happening is people are going to notice what's quality and what's not. The same with like digital, you know, all the digital startups that were like a lot of aggregators and stuff like that. People are now kind of like, I'm tired of this. Like, this is not, like, people really, really value quality, but it may take a while to, you know, get to that point to acknowledge it. But I don't necessarily think you need to know audio, but I do think you need to, like, in terms of like to succeed or like be in the industry, but I think you have to be adaptable and have like, be adaptable, focus on quality, and also have like bring your there's something that makes you or like you stand out, and whether it doesn't necessarily have to be a side project, but I think bringing that to your work or bringing that is going to also help you stand apart. But I think if you care a lot about quality and you show that in your work, that'll make you stand out. But I'm thinking like I know how to do so many things, and I'm just wondering, like, I think it's helpful, but I don't think it's necessary, because I think if you learn how to adapt, if you are already in a place or in stuff like that, that helps you, because a lot of times it's really about getting into a place to stay in the industry anyway, if that makes sense. But I think more being adaptable is super helpful, because there's a lot of people that want me to teach them how to do audio because they just want to stay. But I think in 20 years, whatever that thing is, they're going to want to learn how to do that too. So it's about being willing to like try the new things. Like, you know, all the people that tried TikTok like 2 years ago or whatever that was, maybe it was like a year ago, all those people have like millions of followers. But like people that are starting now, they're just kind of like, I mean, do I start now? They could have blown up. So I think it's about being adaptable and focusing on something that you want to focus on. Because I think I learned all these things, and like I think I do question if they're helpful, because I learned so many things because I wanted to stay and I was so worried about it. But it's kind of like exhausting. So whatever you have the most interest in, definitely stick with that, because the tides are going to change all the time and people are going to decide what's not interesting or what's not helpful and all this stuff. So I don't know if that made sense, but
That's it's a good point you bring up, Bria, in that, you know, you want to be the early adopter in the newsroom or the work environment you're in. I wrote my thesis back in 2014 about early adoption of Twitter. And believe it or not, there was a time when newspapers did not embrace Twitter, and journalists were actually ridiculed for being involved in Twitter. And a big part of my thesis had, it was a dual case study, but it demonstrated how their early adopter young journalists in the newsroom, who were then experts at Twitter, were teaching the veteran journalists who ridiculed them a year or two later about how to actually get on Twitter, because it was written into their job descriptions and their annual reviews at that point. And so it was a really kind of an awkward moment for several of those journalists who had mocked the younger folks for adopting a new technology. So I think being nimble and, you know, recognizing trends and trying things and raising your hands to say, I'll be the person who tries it and I'll share it with everybody else. You could end up like Bria, to where you learn a skill that then you're teaching that to the rest of the newsroom. They may have 30 years of journalism experience, but you may be the expert on a new technology, and there's a nice synergy there to where you can learn from each other.
they're not going to get rid of you because you're the
That's
only
right.
one that knows how to do it.
Right. We have one more student that I'd forgotten she was in the room with us. She's not Zooming, but we have Tian Woods, who's working with Kelly on audience engagement. And I wanted to make sure she had an opportunity to chat with you. So Tian, it's all you.
Okay, hello, I'm Tian, as he said. My question is, you mentioned that you do podcasting and kind of like basically digital work and things like that. So my question is, what would you say the big difference is between creating engagement for your podcast versus your digital stories, or like things that you've done? Because you said that you kind of lean away from that. Now you're kind of more focused on like, podcast slash, I want to say voice, but that's not correct, recordings or things like that. So what do you find like the big differences in creating that big engagement for two digital platforms, but different digital platforms?
Yes, because they're so different. Like with podcasts, it's almost like they're offline, even though they're online. So I think a lot of it is, so for digital with the stories, it's kind of like you share it. There's comments, people comment in wherever you shared it, like, whether responding to the tweet or Facebook post or like Instagram or whatever. But with podcasts, it's like you're taking the person that's listening here and trying to engage with them off of that platform. And that it takes more work because it's like you have to make it interesting because it has to be interesting enough for them to stop. But some people are moving when they're doing podcast, listening to podcasts, they're doing something. So you have to make it interesting enough for them to want to engage with you basically in a separate place in addition to where they're engaging you with their ears. So making it interesting and putting it in the right place. And also it's a lot of trial and error because like I was telling you before, like the marketing part is a lot of like stuff I see other places. But okay, what are the people that are listening to the politics podcast? How do they want to engage with the podcast? Because they're on Twitter, they're on Reddit, they're on like all these various places. Like they're not necessarily on, some of them are on Facebook, but Breakdown, they're on Facebook and they're very active in the Facebook group. So a lot of that is trial and error, and I feel like I'm not an audience person, but it just seems more intense than engaging with people in one place versus like two places, because it's like not, podcasting is so new, or like podcasting in this form, not necessarily just storytelling, but like having like a community, like these are local-ish people and stuff. So yeah, a lot of trial and error and intensity. But yeah, that part is I wouldn't say my least favorite, but it's definitely where the biggest learning curve is, because I don't know what I'm doing in that area.
But I think it's interesting that you were really doing some social and digital production in Greenville, and then you moved into a completely different role here at the AJC. And so, what you bring to your news organization is really, you've got a deep background in different skills that could be employed in different ways across the newsroom. So you're not a one-trick pony. I mean, you could fill a lot of roles in the news organization, which ultimately makes you more valuable when tough decisions are made.
That's why I'm like, yes, because since I've been in the industry, like even when I was interning in 2013, there were like always layoffs. And so that plus needing a job, like there was nowhere for me to go. That was like I feel like that always added stress, and that probably helped lead to a quicker burnout. I think that it just makes you so nervous, and that's why I try to learn so many things. And now it is helpful too. I do think about that too, in terms of like, especially during the pandemic, I'm like, okay, I'm the newest, but I know how to do a lot of things. Like, don't forget about me. So it is helpful. And that's another thing that's beneficial with like, even if it may not be an ideal job, if it's like your first job, if it's something that's like nearby or something that you wouldn't mind doing it, and you don't have, like, as long as it's not a bad situation, it's not necessarily the worst thing to do, because everything you do, you build upon for the next thing. So it's never like useless, even if it's not in journalism.
And if you can get into a news organization, even filling coffee cups, raise your hand, volunteer for everything, fill that coffee, go go make copies, do whatever you can to get to just start learning. There's a lot of people in this industry that started out as a news clerk that became Pulitzer Prize winners. So, you know, that hunger, that initiative, that tenacity, the perseverance, and just really the willingness to say, no work is beneath me. I'm learning, I'm a student, I'm ready to just learn from anybody how to do it. That will be rewarded. It may not be rewarded in 6 weeks, but somebody will notice and you'll get your opportunity. I got one last person I want to ask a question of. Kelly, what have we not asked Bria that we should have?
My one thought might be, it's pretty technical, but just like the editing process and, you know, your workflow. I know you talked about like when you record and like talking into the phone and like the type of equipment and stuff, but like from your experience, what do you look for? What do you think is just like second nature to you now that seems dumb to even say because you think everyone knows it, but they probably don't? So like when people were before, when audio was first becoming big, people were kind of really nitpicking like the ums and the breaths out, and now they're kind of leaving that more because it seems more natural. Stuff kind of like that. Anything that stands out to you maybe?
Well, the first thing is like repetition has really repetition in like editing them once a week is a game changer in terms of noticing more things. So that's like the first thing. I think something else that's second nature is or something that I notice, like I hear everything, even in TV shows. Like I'm like, I don't think they edited that sound good enough. But I think the sacrificing sometimes. So you see how I'm stopping and I'm starting and I'm trying to find the words, sacrificing that. And if people are being repetitive, so I'm being repetitive, but I'm trying to say the thing again, you can cut out some thoughts. And I think it's so easy to, I know this now, which is kind of scary, but it's so easy to cut out. You can cut out a lot of things and still make the point in terms of like, I'm thinking visually, like if there's like a paragraph, you can cut out like the first 2 sentences and still it can flow seamlessly. You just have to like be super, super meticulous, and it may be annoying because you went over this like for this one little second 5 times already, but it's gonna sound really good. And it's really possible to make it sound smooth. You just have to keep trying. So that's those 2. And after a while, the waveforms you're gonna start especially if you have the same person, you start recognizing the waveforms and being able to move quicker that way. But so with repetition, speed and accuracy gets better, but don't be afraid to like, what is the print phrase? Kill your darlings.
Yes.
Cut things out to get to the point in the way that I have not. And that will also, that's something that took me a while to learn, because they say it in print, or in writing, but in audio, it's also helpful because keeping everything doesn't necessarily work to keep people's interest. See how long it took me to get there? You could just cut everything up to like this last line, and then that's perfect. So yeah, killing your darlings, repeating and being willing to be super meticulous, because even with the fade ins and fade outs and stuff like that, it's so particular and it takes so much time. But I like experimenting and watching people on YouTube, especially experimenting with like the music, because when you listen to other podcasts and you see what they're doing or how they like make it sound like, oh, I didn't think to do that. And then trying that way, that helps like you move forward in your podcast skills.
Bria, you have been the most gracious of guests today. We have taken up quite a bit of your afternoon, and you have dropped some serious knowledge on these students. I'm just so grateful for you coming in and sharing your experiences, your wisdom. I'm going to ask our students to DM you their favorite story of the semester, to see if you might listen to their podcast and give them some feedback.
Also,
FTG, I follow him on their Twitter. So you
Okay.
can look out.
Okay, yeah, Tian said she just followed you from Fresh Take, Georgia, so you'll see us coming in hot.
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. All of you are awesome, and I'm very excited to hear your stories. I'm just like, so yes, I'm very excited. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kelly, for inviting me.
We're gonna stay on and talk about stories, guys, so y'all stay here. Bria, you have a wonderful rest of your week. We're gonna be following you closely and watching and learning, and we're gonna send you our best stuff. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Okay, take care. Okay, Carolyn, I'm going to pitch to you real quick and see how you want to lead off this next section. I know we went late today. I apologize for us going so long, but I hope that was useful. You all seemed like you really got a lot out of her.
Hi, everybody. I was just, I enjoyed her presentation a lot. And she mentioned getting some help from NPR. And I'm sure she's talking about a guy named Sean Powers, who's in charge of podcasting for Georgia Public Radio. Georgia Public Broadcasting. And I just sent him he's an old friend of mine. And so I sent him a message and asked if he would speak to the class. And he's trying to figure out what day he can do that. So you'll be hearing from him soon. He spoke to one of my classes back when I was teaching, at Kennesaw State full time. And he really knows his stuff. And so he's won a bunch of awards too for his podcasting. And in addition to being in charge of all the podcasts that GPB does, he has a little side business where he helps people who want to do podcasts, set up their podcasting and host. He has a business that hosts their podcasts. So if any of you have any ambitions to do a podcast on any topic, he's the man, and you need to get to know him because he can host your podcast and get you moving in the right direction. So anyway, I'm hoping he'll be able to come talk to you. He'll probably do it via Zoom, but either March 3rd or after spring break. So Sean Powers is cool, and he'll be a speaker in the near future. I posted on somewhere, I forget, I think it was under legislation, or it might be under, I'm having a hard time keeping up with all these channels. Under Fresh Take Georgia, a little bit of information about where we are in this session. I think y'all remember that they have 40 days to meet, but that's not 40 consecutive days. Although I remember one session where they actually did try and do it in 40 consecutive days, and they were out by this time in February. It was really weird. But usually they stretch it out. And so far, like this week, they're meeting 3 days. Last week, they met 3 days. Next week, they're going to meet 5 days. And I don't know, probably the week after that, they'll probably only meet like 2 days. So and the way and I posted this, is every few weeks they'll pass what they call an adjournment resolution. And in the adjournment resolution, they say which date is going to be which day of the legislature. And so far they've designated which days are going to be up to legislative day 25, which is going to be on March 1. And one of the reasons this is important is that on day 27, the Senate has this rule called crossover day. And I'm going to put, I was just compiling all the rules in the Senate for crossover day, and it's 3.5 pages long. So I'm going to try and condense it into something understandable and do one of my little articles for the wiki. But the gist of crossover day is that at that point, all the Senate bills have to have left the Senate, and all the House bills will have to have left the House if they're going to have any chance of passing this year. So, that's the deadline. And so what you'll see next week is that there'll be, in fact, there will be a flurry of bills being introduced and huge pressure on all the committees to hurry up and meet and consider all the bills that they have and get them out and get them to the floor of the House and the Senate so that they can get over to the other chamber before crossover day. Or at least on crossover day. And nobody wants crossover today to have hundreds of bills. So, and sometimes they do. So crossover day usually goes to midnight, and it has, if not hundreds, at least dozens of bills. And you'll see committee meetings meet all weekend long as they try to process all the bills they have in hand. So it's been really slow so far, but it's getting ready to speed up a lot because everybody knows if you back it up 4 days, everybody will have had to have dropped in the hopper, as the terminology is, all the bills they want to have passed this year by day 33, I think, 23, which is sometime next week. And that's the latest day they can do it. So, and you don't really want to wait that long. So next week we'll start seeing the first readers become huge and people will be dropping bills in left and right. And then all the committees will meet. So all the committee rooms will be booked into the evening. And like I said, they'll probably meet all next weekend just to process all these bills. And the rules calendars, today and tomorrow, the rules calendars have 4 or 5 bills on them, nothing. Next week, the rules calendars are going to be long and the general sessions are going to go on forever. So next week, they're meeting all 5 days next week. Next week is going to be really busy. So next week, we're going to have to be real judicious as to which bills we're going to cover, because we're going to have to really focus on the ones that we think are the most important, and not just, grab some that seem mildly interesting. We're going to have to be looking for some that we think will actually go all the way through the process and get signed by the governor, because we're going to have a ton of bills to choose from. And so far, I'm the only one who's been actually watching the House and Senate general sessions. That can't happen next week because first they're going to be long and involved, and I can't be the only one who's trying to keep track of what's what. So we're going to have some. I'm going to have some help in this regard. So y'all think about that. So anyway, that's next week is when things really speed up. Once everything moves from one side to the other, then it kind of gets a little less busy for a few days while the Senate committee start to consider all the House bills and vice versa. So the committees will back into the other chamber bills for a while, and then they'll start speeding up again. But after day 27, there's 12 days left, and they'll string those out while they consider the other chamber's bills. And the only way to get anything new through the system after crossover day is to find what they call a vehicle. And a vehicle is a bill that covers the same code section in the law as the proposal you have. And then what you do is you amend your proposal into that bill and hope that everybody agrees, including the sponsor of the original bill. So you'll see some of that action in the last couple of weeks of the session. So but with those 12 days, they'll string those out. So it'll be like 3 days a week and 2 days a week here. We're looking at least the end of March before the end of the semester. I mean, of the session. And sometime next week, toward the end of the week, they'll pass another adjournment resolution, and it'll spell out, maybe not all the way to the end, but at least in the first couple of weeks of March, which days they will be meeting. And they do that so that the committee chairs can figure out when they can hold their meetings, and everybody can kind of get organized. And also, all these people who live in South Georgia can figure out when they can go home. So they have to know a little bit in advance. Does anybody have any questions about all of this at this point? Is that?
What might be smart, Carolyn, is next week for our podcast team, and possibly with help from the digital team, if necessary, create a schedule of who could monitor, the regular sessions from the House and Senate, so that they can tag team around class schedules, work schedules, and everything else. We would know where the gaps are, and just know that at Tuesday at 10 o'clock, so-and-so is scheduled to keep tabs on it.
Yeah, all the sessions are almost all going to probably start at 10. Some might start at 9:30. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But they are going to meet all 5 days for the general sessions. And at this point, I think we're really going to just concentrate on the general sessions and not so much on the committee meetings. Unless you're covering a particular topic and you want to see what happens in the committee with those bills. But the general sessions are going to be really interesting next week. So we definitely need to pay attention to them. If you're the one, I'll be watching. If you notice, when you go to the, just click on the Georgia General Assembly main page, there's a way that you can watch both sessions at the same time. There's a place where you can click on it and have both videos up at the same time, and just have them muted, and when one looks interesting, unmute it and see what they're talking about. I've been doing that. And so there's ways to kind of pay attention, but you also have to have up the rules calendars for both, so that you can get an idea of when they're talking about what. And the good news is that it's usually not important for you to pay much attention for the first hour or so, because that's when they're doing all the procedural stuff. They don't get to the rules calendar for about an hour. But anyway, so usually you really need to start paying attention about 11 o'clock. So anyway, yeah, what do you want me to do, Gary? Just take volunteers?
Well, I think what we'll do is let's have the podcast team and the digital team talk offline, and then when we convene on Monday, let's have a plan of or sooner. If y'all get a plan together sooner, you can drop it in Slack and just let us know. But y'all work among yourselves to see who can spend some time on that, and let us know where the gaps are, and so that we know when it might not be monitored.
Yeah. Send me a message if you know I'm available from 11 to 1 on Tuesday or whatever, and I'll start making a little schedule, and we'll see where my gaps are. That'll be very helpful. And also, if you have a topic that that you really are going to be following next week, that in that same message, let me know. I'm following the voter bills. I'm following these bills. I'm following those bills. So I have them all in one place. That'll help too. So anyway, and I will try, if not today, tomorrow, to have the crossover article written, and I'll send it out for everybody to read. Like I said, there's 3 pages of rules on it. And the funny thing about it is the House doesn't mention, House rules has no mention at all on crossover day. This is strictly a Senate defensive action. I'm sure they came up with this because the House would be sending them bills at the very last minute saying, you got to pass this. And they would say, and they would be inundated. So they backed it up and said, look, if you're going to send us bills, you got to send it to us by the 27th day so that we have time to consider them with some kind of dignity. And so they instituted all these really strict rules that the House has to follow if they want their bills to pass. And so the House doesn't say anything about it because the Senate has imposed these rules on them. And you'll hear them bitch about it from the well. It's like, well, the Senate says we have to get these bills over there, so we have to do this, and they blame the Senate for all this rush that they're going to have next week. But hey, somebody has to impose some order on the process or we're all going to go crazy. But anyway, that's the way that works. So anyway, I'll have that out for you before the end. Before the end of the week. So that's where we stand at this point. Anybody have any questions on the legislative process at this point?
Okay, I see some fatigue from our students because we're zooming along here today.
Okay.
I'm trying to speed this along here quickly, but we have an update from our podcast team that was happening in Slack, so I feel like we're pretty good with those guys. The digital students, I wanted to let you know, I think I have 3 digital stories, one from Alexa, one from Addison, and one from Kate that have all been signed off and edited and corrected by Dr. Carlson. Is that correct?
Yes. I want, Kate, is Kate gone? Oh, there you are, Kate. I need to see your story one more time. Okay, if you send it back to me, I appreciate it.
The last one?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'll get that over to you today.
Okay, great. Thanks. Other than that, the others are ready to go. Yeah.
Okay. So Kelly and Tian are going to be working with Gwinnett after this call to get those posts built as a tutorial. And then we should be closer to being a little more up to speed to get those up a little faster. But the way this works is once Professor Speakman says your story is good to send to Carolyn, you send it to Carolyn. And you put it in the folder of drafts, and then you send her a link via Slack. Here's my story. She gives you edits. You correct her, your story. You let her know I've corrected them, and then once she approves your corrections, then you can save your story and it's ready to publish, and then you can let Kelly and Tiana and me know it's ready to go. Does that sound good for everybody?
Yeah, and Gwinnett and I were talking. When you're producing your story, please be sure to put a headline as well as your byline, as well as at least one subhead in there. And a subhead really only needs to be like 2 words, okay? We're trying to break up the type and links. And listen, when you're putting in a link, don't put in a link to another reporter story from another news outlet, okay? We need links to your source material like the bill or the committee hearing video. Or if you interview somebody who's from an organization, you can link to their website, but not to a WSB or an AJC story, okay? None of that. But any links you have that are relevant that way, that'd be great. Because these are online stories. That's what you should have in them, okay?
Every single bill that you write about should be hyperlinked on first reference.
Yes.
And I was going to have Kelly talk a little bit about headlines and just digital production of your stories. I might save that for another day when it's not so late, but do you have, a quick blurb of that?
Yeah, just typically the shorter the better. You don't want to make a headline too wordy. You don't want to turn people off. We typically tend to keep them to 70 characters or less. So that is really not a lot of words. Kind of stay away. Don't do the Georgia legislature, stay away from that. Just kind of get to the point. Essentially, when you're thinking about your headline, think about how you would tell it in one sentence to pitch it and kind of refine that, if that makes sense.
Georgia lawmakers considering election bills.
Yeah. And remember, a headline is not a title. It has a verb in it, okay?
present tense verb.
Preferably, yeah, but it's not a title, it's not a label, it's a headline, and a headline has a verb. Or it could be an understood verb, but it's still a phrase that has a verb to it, okay?
And headlines, I mean, headlines are tricky. And so if you guys want to toss ideas back and forth in one of the channels, or if we want to create a headline advice channel that you kind of get different eyes on, that can be really helpful too, because it does take, it's a process to get the right headline for sure.
I think the last thing in the world we need is another channel, except for maybe that one.
No. Yeah. No more channels, please. I have hard enough time figuring out what.
A headline channel at our NPR member stations, and because it is groupthink, I don't care if we do an extra channel or not, but I would say if you have a question about your headlines, ping Kelly, and let her, give some insight on that. And, Kelly, if you have any documentation or even your own, 10 steps or 5 cents of free advice sort of thing that you want to drop into the group, we would welcome that as well.
Yeah.
Same with your subheads. Those are not long sentences, your subheads. Those are going to be short, but it's going to help break up that big copy block when we present it in a digital format.
And a subhead can be a label. It can't, it can be just a couple of words. It doesn't necessarily have to have a verb like the headline does.
And then last thing, when you're sending your stories, if there's something very specific that you think is really like a really interesting point of the story that's not just the overall bill that you want highlighted, let myself or Tion know, and we can kind of tease to that in our social copy, because we might not pick up on it, but you obviously know the story the best.
And we may change your headline, but again, you know the story the best. So you take the first crack or two at it. You can even provide a couple of headlines or 3 headline versions. And that way, between all of us, we can say, you're close here. Let's take this version. Let's massage it a little bit. But let's start with you, because you know your story better than everybody. Any questions about digital stories coming in? Does anybody else have stories or content in general from your capstone that we should be expecting?
Oh, I do. So I just recently wrote a story. I turned it in this past week in a Speakman, and it regards, House Bill 290, where they're going to try to allow patients in hospitals or like long-term care facilities to be allowed 2 visitors 2 hours per day. And like the hospital can't deny them unless they completely just don't even abide by their safety protocols. So Speakman replied and said it was good. The ending of my story is kind of compacted, so I'd have to fix that. But then once I do that, I'll send it to Carolyn.
Great. Can't wait to read it. Thank you.
Alexa, wasn't that your story last week?
Yeah, I did an audio piece on it for the podcast, but I think it would be good in written form too. And it's probably, I don't know if it's moved at all since our podcast came out. So
I don't know. Mine kind of just went over the basics, and then I included, because I watched the meeting. I don't know if you included the personal stories that when people came in and shared their personal stories.
Darian, listen to the number 5 podcast.
Okay.
So that it doesn't overlap.
Okay.
Take it a step further.
Okay, yeah, I'll listen to it while reading my story and just make sure that there's no overlapping repetition.
Yeah, thank you.
Really fast, I think it's okay to overlap a little bit too, and especially if you have stories that correlate to each other, we can hyperlink back to the other person's story or back to the podcast episode and keep that track.
A step further though, and I'd rather you not use exactly the same quotes.
Well, I think it's important to remember that we can't expect that people who listen to podcasts also read. They tend to be different audiences.
That's true. You're right. You're right.
And I'll check out now.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Burton.
Okay, so we got a story coming in from Darian. We got Kate's going to have final read by Dr. Carlson. We got Addison's and Alexa's in the queue ready to get up today. Anything else, any other matters of business we need to address? Okay, you guys rock. Let's get this scheduled for watching the sessions next week. And let us know what you need. Podcast folks, we are looking forward to seeing those scripts tomorrow. let's not come in late with those. So Carolyn's up until 10 p.m. approving scripts. Some of us get up very early in the morning, and 10 o'clock is late. So let's hit our deadline according to what Dr. Carlson laid out in the Slack, and then we'll aim to get this podcast released by noon on Friday morning or Friday afternoon. Okay, go team. Great job, guys. Oh, wait. One last thing. AP is coming in next week. I'll put this in Slack, but we've got Jeff Ami, who has covered the legislature for Mississippi, Louisiana, and Georgia. It might be Alabama and Georgia. And then Jim Van Englund, who runs the Southeast desk for AP, is going to come in and talk about digital content, AP expectations, coming into your careers with AP, all kinds of things. So look those guys up. I'll send some links out, but make sure you don't miss next week. It's going to be a really good session again, I think.
Cool.
Okay, now be gone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
I just
guys.
got here.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah. Since I'm here, let me just update you guys. I just interviewed Tom Gale from the Georgia Municipal Association, I think it's what it's called. He's the director of governmental affairs or relations. Sorry, I was getting a phone call. And we had a good talk, and I also got a lot of good sound bites from today's committee meeting about it, where it just passed. So it's going to go to the House floor soon.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I think, that was a wise use of your time today, Jeremy. I will say that you missed a really productive guest speaker. So I'm going to share with you the link to this recorded Zoom, and you can watch it at your leisure. But Bria Felicien from the AJC was just fantastic. And I think you'll find, what she shared with the team of value.
Awesome. I'll look into it tonight then.
Okay, I'll get that to you as soon as it drops from the cloud.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.